In the previous video, I showed you how you can animate in Lightwave, simply moving objects, moving your timeline, setting keyframes, deleting keyframes, and adjusting motions. But there's another way you can keyframe and set animation, and it has to do with textures and envelope values and motions and things like that. Something that's not quite as visual as it is as our timeline down here at the bottom of the screen. So to start, let's go to the Modeler Tools tab at the top of the Layout interface. And then under the Geometry drop-down, we're going to create a ground plane. That's that first selection right there. And we're going to leave 10 meters for the X and Z. And I think everything else is fine. But let's give it some segments this time. Let's do 6. I'll hit the Tab key to jump down. Hit 6. Hit the Tab key to jump down. Ground plane for the surface name is fine. And then I'm going to hit Save Objects. And that should save to my content directly. Let's see. Signature course. Content objects. Good. So because my content directory was set up, this knows to set it there. Now, it's calling it ground plane. Actually, I'm going to choose just ground. And we're going to call this just ground, because we might already have one in there from our previous example. Now click OK, and there's a nice ground plane. Now let's go back to geometry again, and we're just going to do a sphere. So original. All right, for the surface editor, we've got the surface of sphere, and I'm going to put smoothing on. I'm going to get to my camera view, and I'm going to press the Y command and make sure that camera is selected at the bottom of the screen, and that way I can actually rotate this. Then press the T key, and then with the right mouse move up, Y command move down, T key move it around, Y key for rotate, not R, T, and then press Y. Okay, just to fill the frame. Command or Control S to save, and I'll call this animated texture. All right, so we've got that set up. Let's put a texture on here. For the first thing is, let's go to the ground, and for the ground, I'm just going to create just simple dark surface like this. What I'm also going to do is at the top of the layout, change to VPR mode so you can see everything in real time. Let's take our light real quick and press 4 on our keypad just to see where it's at. I want to be able to see that shadow, and from where our camera position is, we actually are right, the shadow's actually right behind this ball. So what I'm going to do is actually just rotate the light. So with the light selected, I'm going to press Y on the keyboard and just click and drag. Because it's a default directional light, I don't even need to see it. I just know that rotation is going to change that value for me. Okay. Then I'll go press 6 again. Now we got a little bit of depth in there, and that's fine. We'll go back here to the surface editor and choose sphere. And let's give this kind of a nice gold color perhaps. A little specularity, a little bit of gloss, and let's give it a little bit of reflection. And for the reflection, we need to bring the diffuse down to kind of balance it out. And for the environment, it's ray tracing and backdrop, and that's fine. All right, so what can we do in terms of animating textures? Well, I showed you in the previous videos earlier how you can put a texture, one of these guys here, onto a surface on the handle of the hammer. Well, there's these E buttons as well. And when you're in the texture editor, there's E buttons here. They're all over the place. Well, what can you do with that? Well, let's leave the floor alone for the time being, except that I do want the floor to be a little reflective, kind of like that. Okay. Now we'll go back to the sphere. So really, really basic surfaces at this point. Now what we're going to do is, let's say you want to change this color over time. This is where the E button comes in. So you click this, and the graph editor comes up. Now we've already kind of mentioned the graph editor in the previous video. But now what we're doing is we're adding color rather than motion to the graph editor. What does that mean? Well, the graph editor, as I explained, shows every single motion channel. Whether it's a rotation, a translation, an XYZ movement, a scale. You can also put in RGB colors. Well, down here at the very bottom, there's move, and then there's create key. There's stretch, rotate, and zoom. Typically, you're not going to use these ones too much. You're going to mostly use these first two. And when I go to create key, I'll come over here to 50, and I'll just click, I'll come over to 100. I'll click up here, maybe 200, click here, and click over here. And what I just did was actually create a keyframe. So let's jump back to move, and then we'll click and drag on the slider. And I just created keyframes for what? For the RGB values, because I clicked the E button next to color. It took those values and brought them in here. So now what I can do then, with just one channel selected with the move tool, is move that up. And let's do this so you can see what's going on. As I move my timeline, and then we'll choose our green. And now you can see that color changing in there. And then let's come over to this guy here, move that green way down. And let's move red all the way. So you can see how I can just change each one of these color values over time. Let's pull that one way up, and so on. And if you lose the curve like this, just press the A key to fit. So what do these values mean? Well, here is the RGB value right here. Well, let's say this guy right here, this is the blue channel at this other keyframe, just set it to 0. And what that's doing, it's mixing your RGB values. So for instance, I'll take the right mouse button. Well, first I'll select all three. I'll take the right mouse button with all three of these, and if the value is 255, I get pure white. If that value is 0, I get black. Okay, so I can go to any one of these channels then and say, okay, well, let's select this first green channel, and maybe I want it a full 255. And I'll press the A key to fit it in. Select the blue, hold the control key to select the red, right mouse over these two, and maybe give those a 0 value. Now you have 100% green to work with. And you can go from black to red over time. So if you look right here in the layout, as I scrub through here, let me try and squeeze my screen down a little bit. There we go. We're going from black, and it just fades to red, or fades to green. Okay, so all we're doing is changing those color values over time. So we're still animating, but we're not animating with this timeline down here. We're actually animating within the graph editor. So again, one more thing here. I could take this red right over here and say, you need to be 200%. And then I will take the green and blue and maybe make those, I don't know, 50%. And get kind of a nice amber color. And so just like that, I can actually set up a colored animation over time. So think of police lights, think of disco lights, all kinds of things like that. Mix that with luminosity, and now you've got this glowing, colorful orb that just seems to be changing inside and out. You've animated those color textures. By the same token, you can actually apply a texture. Let me come back up here. Like a bump map. So I'll hit the T key for the bump. We'll put a procedural texture on. And I'm going to bring the luminosity and the brightness down on this guy just a little bit. Then we'll come back here. There we go. So the base procedural texture is turbulence. If I hit automatic size, it perfectly sizes that to about the 1 meter cube that it is. But I can also select these and say maybe 0.4, 0.4, 0.4. And I hit the tab key to select between those. And that brings that crumple texture all the way down. It's very nice, very easy bump map. And I called it crumple, but it was actually turbulence. This is crumple. And again, you can just hit automatic sizing, or you can enter a value like that. Well, what if you want this to change over time? Maybe it's position. Well, how would position work on this? Well, look. I'm moving it on the Y. It's actually moving up. Or what about the Z? Or the X? Well, it's not going to go very far because, well, it's on a ball. It's wrapping around. And it kind of gives you the effect of traveling water. You can also work on the rotation just to give it some unique properties. Okay, so any one of these values. So let's just go back here to scale and see there's E buttons next to all of these, doing position and rotation. Well, if I click that, what happens? Those channels are entered into the graph editor. So you can see right here, here's the RGB channels, here's the procedural crumple. And what that means is over time, I can animate that texture. So we'll come back here to 0. I'll hit the key, and I need a little more room here. And so with these scale, I just want to make sure you can see this, scale X, Y, and Z, we can say on the X over maybe 100 frames, where's it going to move to? So notice when we enter these values into the graph editor, rather than percentage like we have with the color, you actually have a size parameter, millimeter, or position. So I'm just going to say move it to 6 meters. And how do I know 6 meters? Well, if you look down here at the very bottom, my grid is set to 1 meter, my world measurement. So 6 meters, it's moving a little bit away, not too fast. And what's going to happen then, I'm going to close these up so you can see, is that over time, and I'm going to push that like that, you can actually see both the color and that texture moving now across that ball. I'm animating both those color and textures. And press the A key. Now, a few other things about basic animation. With the ball selected, we'll jump back to a shaded or even a texture shaded solid. I'll press M for motion options. And in the motion options panel, there's an add modifier drop down. And one of them is gravity. So I'll select gravity. I'm going to take my camera by pressing Shift C on the keyboard, a little shortcut to jump over there. Press the T key to move. I'm going to move out, and the right mouse button moves me up. Actually, I'm going to move down, and I'm going to rotate up. Let's do that. Take this light, press the T key, and slide that out of the way. And then back here. Now, here, I just did something bad. My timeline was at 164. I selected the light and moved it. And because auto key was on, I now actually animated that light. Let me come back here to perspective. It's not going to matter because a light's position, when it's a distant light, doesn't matter. Only its rotation does. But again, something to be aware of with that auto key because it will catch you. You might be at one point in time like I was, and well, you accidentally moved something. So let's hit cut key, and let's make our first frame 0. And then now let's move the light. Okay, so something to be careful of. All right, so, and again, I did the same with the camera too, but that's okay. So let's take the ball, and we'll go back here to 0. And I'll hit perspective, press 4 on the keyboard, and we'll just come around so you can see this. Select the ball, and I'm going to press the T key, and I'm going to move it up about here. So, we're talking about animation. We've shown you animation with keyframes, shown you animation with the graph editor, animating color and animating textures. Well, using a motion modifier, which is what this is, we selected an object like the ball, pressed M, which calls out the motion options, and then from the add modifier chose gravity. I'll double-click gravity, and that will open up the properties for it. Now, the normal strength of gravity is negative 9.8 meters per second. And I think meters per second squared, but 9.8, negative 9.8 is typical gravity. But in this particular thing, the strength, it understands that gravity, there's the G, is negative 9.8. So by setting this at 1, you're using the full gravity. And just to see how it works, press play. Don't do anything else. All you have is the default settings here on the y-axis. And it's just bouncing. So how can we change that? Well, let's change elasticity to maybe 40. Hit the play button. That's it. We just animated a bouncing ball. So I know that's taught in animation school quite a bit and understanding the flow and everything, and it's very easy to do, just getting that timing. But once you know how to do that, it's a lot easier to put the gravity plug-in on. If I make this gravity 2, that's twice the strength of normal gravity. And it gives it a little bit heavier look. And maybe the elasticity comes down to like 15%. And let's hold it for 10 frames by making the start time 10. And then we'll hit the play button again. Let's rewind. There's our bowling ball that just dropped. Boom. Okay, so just multiple ways to animate. Keyframes with our typical timeline keyframe traditional, then using envelopes in our surface editor to animate color values and bump values, bump textures, then even using motion options to do animation. Throughout Lightwave, you are going to see those little E buttons. You probably won't see them too much in some of the render areas, but they are there. Here's the ambient color. There's an E button. You can animate the ambient light. Over here in the camera panel, focal length. Oh, you can animate it. There's an E button. The anti-aliasing, you can animate. Why? I don't know why you would do that, but you can if you wanted to. Under the global illumination of radiosity design, you can animate the intensity. Okay? Nothing under geometry tab. When we get to our backdrop options, you can come over here to volumetrics, and we haven't talked about that yet, but you can animate the fog values. And in processing, you can animate some of the image processing features. So they are throughout Lightwave. And even if you press P for the object properties and go to render, there's envelopes for the dissolve. So you can actually dissolve something out over time. So here's our ball. We just made it dissolve. Well, let's set an envelope for it. Just press the E button. That channel then is added to the graph editor automatically. Here's the keyframe. At 0, and here's 200. Just click to add it, then choose the move. Right mouse to select this one. So at frame 196, it is what? 100% what? Dissolved, because that's what we're clicking on. That's what we added. At frame 0, it is 0% dissolved. Zero is 0% dissolved. Hold on. Let's make sure we get that key in there. And then 196 is 100%. I had forgotten to select that first keyframe. So when I made my change here, I was making it to my original 196. So now we're going from 0% dissolved to 100% dissolved. But see, it's very linear. Well, right mouse button over these. Let's choose the move tool. And earlier I showed you about tension, continuity, and bias. If we do a tension of 1, we ease out and ease in. That's it. So now this ball's dropping with a motion modifier. It's changing its color over time with an animated RGB value, as well as making the texture move. We've animated the bump map, and we accidentally moved the camera, so that's moving. But now we've animated the dissolve. The transparency is still set, but the dissolve itself, and you know, there's a variation with those two. Sometimes it doesn't matter. Transparency is still at 0, so it's not transparent. We actually dissolve the whole object out. And you know, the reason I like to do that better is because the shadow fades out with it. Often if you just fade out the transparency, your shadow will be there until it's 100% gone. So just something to be aware of. I'm going to save the scene anyway. So there you go. Multiple ways to do animation and keyframing in Lightwave.